This is I Am Change podcast. The IIC podcast hopes to inspire you to live more consciously and be the change the society needs. I'm your host, Korede Azeez. In one of our previous episodes, we spoke with Dr. Adebayo about the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and how far Nigeria has come. When I asked about which specific goals we should focus more on as a nation, the first one he mentioned was SDG 16. Goal 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. It includes commitments to fight corruption, increase transparency, tackle illicit financial flows, and improve access to information. You know why this goal is so critical to the entire SDG 2030 agenda? Because corruption undermines progress on all other SDGs. In fact, the United Nations estimates that corruption, bribery, tax evasion, and related illicit financial flows deprive developing countries of around $1.26 trillion per year. $1.26 trillion. This week, we'll be looking into government transparency, specifically the legislative arm of government. Usually, we hear a lot about what the executive arm is doing, that is the president, governors, ministers, and so on. But have you stopped to think about what kind of bills are being proposed, which ones become laws, and the process that makes all of this happen? In a developing country like Nigeria, where there are so many challenges, the quality of policy making and legislation is absolutely important. With the right legislation, we can improve our chances of success with some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Goals like poverty alleviation, good public health system, quality education, economic growth, and sustainability, which you might agree with me Nigeria needs right now. I came across a project called NASS-AI. Now, this project uses artificial intelligence to make parliamentary bills more accessible to everyone. I had a chat with Wale Akinfaderin, one of the machine learning specialists behind the projects. Here's our interview.
So my name is Wale Akinfaderin. I'm a data scientist. I have worked as a data scientist in big tech. I have experience in working with data in the renewable space. And also I've worked in the retail space. I was an experimental physicist before transitioning into data science. If I'm not doing my full-time work in my spare time, I'm actually doing research, and most of my research is around data and data science for the developing world. And so I've done things around using data science to solve problems in developing countries and in low to medium resource countries.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm curious though, why the jump from physics to AI and tech and all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to be an experimental physicist, which means that you're in the lab. I'm in the lab. I build instrument, I make stuff, and then I run experiment. But when I run experiment, I have to make sense of the data, and then so making sense of the data from my experiment, maybe doing some simple analysis or building statistical models, they were much more interesting to me. And so that was one of the reasons why I actually went into data science. And then I also had the opportunity to do data science, like a research internship with IBM Research in Nairobi in 2016. And so I actually went from the States to Nairobi, where in the team, the IBM research team, they were actually using data and machine learning and AI to solve problems in sort of the African context. So they were solving problems in health, in transportation, in energy, in health, in security. So that was very exciting for me, and I actually saw that data and AI was going to be the best path for me.
Oh, that's very interesting background there. Before we jump into discussing NASS-AI, for those of my listeners who may not understand what artificial intelligence is, could you please give an overview?
Artificial intelligence it's very wide-ranging, and it's a branch of computer science that is actually concerned with building smart machines that are capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence. Let's say, for example, you're working in an industry and you want to do a quality control check, which means you're trying to bring out a product and you have a human that looks at it and say, yeah, it's good or it's not good, right? And then that's going to take several man hours, right? And so one of the things you're trying to do is you can actually build machines to or AI systems to actually look at this and probably to take them milliseconds to know if this product has a defect or not. And so the idea is that in most cases, it uses historical data to generalize when it sees new data.
All right. So now on to NASS-AI. I know that the project has to do with the legislative arm of government and making bills more accessible to people and all that. But how exactly does that work?
Okay, so I'll probably go into a little bit of background information around NASS, right? So there was, I think it was last year, I was having a discussion with someone, and we were discussing what the pension of the president, the vice president, the senate, like when they finish, what are they going to be receiving, right? And I said, I remember there was a bill that was passed. I mean, several bills, but they're always amending it and increasing it. So I said, I need to go find the bill. And then I went to NASS-AI's website and I clicked on somewhere and I saw that they had all the bills. But the problem is that there was no way I could find the exact thing that I was looking for. Because everything was just there, jumbled together. If I'm not even looking for that bill, let's say I'm from Anambra State, I'm looking for the healthcare bill that was actually passed by my senator or the House of Rep in my constituency. How can I easily find it, right? Even if it's on their website, it's just difficult. I have to go through 2,000, 3,000 bills for me to see it.
Yeah, Nigerian websites have that problem a lot. I mean, whether it's ministries or whatever, it's always just a mess.
It's always a mess, right? So and then I went to the United Nations SDG goals, and one of the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, they said something about ensuring something about responsive, participatory, and representative decision making at all levels. And also, I was checking some other website where they were talking about government policies and open data, right? And so there's some threshold that you need to meet for you to say that you're actually observing or you're implementing open data policies, right? So which means your data, you need to, apart from you releasing your data to the public, you also need to make sure that it's easily accessible. You need to make sure that all the metadata are provided. And so that was actually what led me to NASS-AI. And then now your question about how NASS-AI works is that, so what we did was, at least the first stage of NASS-AI was we collected data from the Nigerian Assembly, and then we had people label this data. So we had about 8 labels. So the 8 labels were mostly defined by sort of socioeconomic indicators. So healthcare, agriculture, research and technology, security, social welfare, and then there's something on government operation, right? And then what we did was then we used AI to build an automatic classification model. So which means that our AI system can take a bill and immediately you see not only a bill that is passed, but a bill that is introduced or about to be introduced. It will tell you, oh, this is an healthcare bill in, I don't know, in milliseconds or less. So it tell you this without even, without you reading it all. So it's actually a very good way to sort of create this data set according to their different metadata or labels. So that was the first step. That was what we did.
That's brilliant, really. So I read your paper on NASS-AI actually, and there I saw that you plan to design a tool that combines information from all bills and categories and make them easily accessible to everyone. So what kind of tool is this? Is this a website?
Yeah. So we plan to actually have a web app. And so this web app would, apart from having access to the bill, you'd also have access to like other metadata. So the year, the senator or the House of Rep member that actually passed the bill, just all the necessary information that you need, you have access to it. That's one. 2, you also have access to something that we're trying to implement, which is going to be some sort of semantic search indexing. So you could take a bill, right, and you could say that this bill is healthcare and it says this. Can you return the top K bills that are most similar to this bill.
Okay.
So let's say that you have a bill, because one of the things I've seen also is that there's a lot of redundancy in the process, right? So there's a bill that someone probably introduced 10 years ago, right? And someone is introducing it now. Maybe they didn't even have access to that bill, right? So this is going to actually cut, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, or you actually then understand that this bill was introduced a few years ago. So you could search for similar bills to a certain bill. So we're planning to do that. And then also, we hope that this website would have like a dashboard of analysis. So like really simple informations like, what bills are part, like what percentage of healthcare bill was passed in 2008, or what percentage of security bills were passed post the election in 2012, for example, right? Things like that. So we hope to have that.
I mean, it sounds like it's going to be useful not just for citizens, but even lawmakers themselves, especially when you are talking about, redundancy and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea is that it should help lawmakers. Also, it should help people that are into policy research. For example, you want to check like the bills that are introduced, are they informed by the citizens? Are they informed by like the policies? Are they informed by what's happening? Like for example, you could get an indication from the newspaper, right? If all the things you've been saying is COVID, right? Are they actually introducing more public health bills around that period? Things like that. So it's going to help policy research, and also it's going to definitely help lawmakers themselves to reduce redundancy and be more efficient.
All right, brilliant. So is this web app up yet?
No, it's not up. It's not up yet. We got a grant. And we're trying to improve on our algorithm, and then we've also, so building the web app is part of it. Hopefully by the end of the year we should have something, and then also we're extending some of these methods to other countries.
That's brilliant. That's really good.
Yeah.
Throughout this process, when you were trying to build the project, what did you learn? What did you discover about the way the system works, and what were the drawbacks?
So the first thing that I discovered was that extracting information from document can be a little difficult than I anticipated. So for example, these bills are saying about, these are like bills that were passed during maybe that were introduced during the Obasanjo regime, right? These are some bills that the PDF, the quality, I think you probably saw it in the paper, the quality was pretty low. There are some of them you don't even know what's happening. You just see. So which means that we had to be extremely smart with the way that we're extracting the information to make sure that we're not, because sometimes there's some stuff like PDF to text that you can just extract stuff from PDF directly. But for these, we had to use like pre-trained AI tools, or they call it OCR tools, optical character recognition, that would actually take the PDFs and would convert them to images, and then try to use AI to extract text from these images. So that's what we did. It wasn't too great, the performance, but it also improved stuff. So that's one thing that I saw. Then another thing that I also noticed, one data that is unavailable is there. So when a bill is passed, it actually goes through different steps. So the legislative process involves the bill going through like first reading and second reading, and maybe sometimes third reading, and then it's passed into law, and then there's committee recommendation, and then the president signs it. It's been extremely difficult to get data that actually tracks that process. So all the bills that we've been working on are bills that are introduced to the parliament. So we actually don't have like information. So one thing I'm trying to do is to maybe just reach out to if there's a secretary or somebody in the National Assembly to see if we can actually get that data. And the reason why I would want that data is, so I just submitted a paper recently to a conference for Kenya. So for Kenya, we were able to get metadata on the bills. So I think from 2009 to 2019. So we actually know bills that went to first reading and second reading and this. So normally when you introduce a bill, right, statistically it's like a 50-50 chance, right? That, is it going to pass or not, right? So what we want to do is that, can we build a model that actually tells you if a bill is going to pass or not, and it's more than a 50% chance.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
and so
how's that coming on? You said you were trying to reach out to someone, maybe a secretary or someone, to
no,
get.
I haven't in Nigeria. I haven't reached out to
Okay.
anybody yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but I plan to. But for Kenya, I was able to get that easily. For South Africa, I've reached out to somebody. I think for Nigeria, I probably don't know who to reach out to. I probably need to check more. Because I mean,
that's fine.
yeah, I remember recently I actually CC'd one of the presidential aides where I was asking if there is a library or a public somewhere where I can get every single public speech by presidents of Nigeria, dating back to years, and nobody replied, but that's fine.
All right then. So what does the legislative arm of government need to do? Because I mean, you are talking about open data governance and the SDGs and stuff. What exactly does our government need to do to meet up the principles required for open data governance?
There is this report by the WWF Foundation, which is called the Open Data Barometer. So the Open Data Barometer is actually it's a global measure to see how different governments across the world are publishing and using open data for accountability, for innovation, and social impact, right? And so the World Wide Web Foundation, they started this open data barometer, and it's pretty big. They have different methodology, and in fact, I think in the last G20 meeting, they had all the G20 members to commit to something called the Anti-Corruption Open Data Principles.
According to Open Data Barometer, Nigeria ranks 21 out of 100 in the global measure on government publishing and using open data for accountability, innovation, and social impact. The reality is, Nigerian legislators are struggling to meet up with the principles required for open data governance. The average Nigerian doesn't have basic access to parliamentary documents, something that needs to change. Now back to the question of what exactly the legislature needs to start doing right now.
The first thing that they need to think is about, one is always publish every single data for accountability. So, and when I say simply, it goes beyond just publishing the bills, right? So one of the things I would say, for example, is that I've been thinking about modeling the different speech, like when they give speech, right, in parliament. Like, is this something that I can actually do, maybe some speech to text, and do like a topic model to find like the keywords of like what are the important things that they are discussing that can affect, but this data I cannot get it. The only way is that maybe there's some website that they have video, there's some YouTube channels where they have videos of parliamentarians speaking and things like that, but it's not consistent. It's maybe when there's an event, or maybe when they're trying to confirm ministers and things like that, so they're not doing that, right? And also the other thing is, this FY, freedom of information laws, the different state government trying to make sure that their budgets is open and things like that. I know that I should actually give a shout out to Budget IT.
They're doing really good work.
They're doing extremely, probably the most important work in Nigeria in the last decade. I would give it to them, because they've been really, really pushing to track projects. They have this tracker.ng also, right? And so so I would say that they need to try to adopt some of this open data charter. So make sure that this open data, it's people can use it for accountability, innovation. They actually need to also, if possible, have for every like the House of Assembly, the Senate, the different ministries, right? They need to have data experts. They need to have data experts that would that would inform them, that would advise them on like what data they should release and things like that, and also that would drive them towards not making decisions in the dark, but making data-driven decisions.
That makes sense.
And then one thing I forgot to say is that they should also fund projects that are data intensive, so for innovation and social impacts.
Projects such as?
So there are a lot of projects that are data intensive. I wouldn't say one project. Okay, let's say, for example, there's this group called Data Science Nigeria. I don't know if you've heard of them. And one of the
No, I
things that
haven't.
they're trying to do is, it's a non-profit. And for example,
Okay.
they're training, basically they have this huge goal to train 1 million data scientists in the next 10 years in Nigeria. And they're working towards it. So there's actually a Data Science Nigeria AI club in almost every major university in Nigeria right now. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the kind of organization I would say.
They should fund.
They're doing a lot of things to also just the fact that in the next few years data is going to become, and AI, they're going to become increasingly more important, and then there would also be a need for talent. So young people are going into data fields very early, so that's good.
All right, brilliant. So we're talking about like the National Assembly and everything. Are there any plans to also look into bills and processes from State House of Assemblies?
That's a good question. No. Actually, so the reason I said no is I think I tried looking for data from a state. I can't remember what state exactly, and I just couldn't find anything, right? And so the first thing is that for a lot of these states, they're not even digitizing their data. Right, so it's probably, maybe these bills are probably files in places and all that. So in addition to all I've mentioned, a sort of long-term digitization strategy efforts will also be important for state governments.
State houses of assembly are just as important as the National Assembly. What if you could start conversations about digitizing documents from your state house of assembly? That's just something for you to think about. So we've been talking about making parliamentary documents more available to people and how we can do this using technology. But do you know why it's important to be able to access legislative bills? I asked Wally.
So, final question. How will NASS-AI benefit the average Nigerian? I mean, you make the data easily available, but what can citizens do with that information that will benefit the common man? Basically, why should we care about this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are a lot of reasons of why the average citizens should care about it, right? So, for example, during election period, right?
Yeah.
The politician, they use an entirely different campaign strategy, right? Which is what we know, like campaign strategy of just maybe go attack your opponent, be able to bring entertainment, share stuff, tell people that I built this road, I did this. Well, it's maybe easier to see from a state government or a president, but for the House of Rep and the Senate, they are decision makers, right? So if the average citizen is actually more involved in that decision making process, which is understanding what bills are they even introducing, what bills are they supporting, what is their voting records, is this person fighting for me, right? And so if average citizens have all those information at their fingertips, I mean, I feel like it's going to make the political process much more open, and also just much more like people can think for them. People have other information to decide on candidates, right? So that's one of the things that you want to understand. One is the legislative process, like what is happening in the legislature, like what are they introducing, what are they signing on, what are these views, why is it that, for example, the House of Rep member for my constituency is much more important in trying to, for example, increase salary for themselves or something like that than women's rights, than a bill that talks about health, right? Than voting or supporting a bill that actually improves healthcare, right? So those are some of the things that would actually help people, and also it also helps that we need to see the different facets of government. So which means we need to start looking beyond the governors and the executive. So the governors and the president, and start thinking about the legislation, because think about it, there are 360 plus 105 plus 1 plus 100. There are over almost 460 or 470 legislators, federal legislators. That's a lot of people.
It is a lot.
Yeah. And so there should be a way to sort of make their work more accountable.
Yeah, totally understandable. I hope more people get interested in tracing these things, because it's one thing to make the tool available, and then it's another thing for people to actually use it as they should.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I absolutely agree with you. And also in terms of people using it, it will foster a gradual behavioral change, right? So, one example I can tell you is, let's say, budgets, right? Normally, budgets would write letters and things to like government and House of Rep member. Is that you collected this money for this, and for years they won't reply. But now, most of them, they have to reply, because one is there now. You see the budget is much more credible, and then they also have constituents that actually look at budgets and say that, wait, this is my House of Rep. Okay, I need to, I don't know, maybe call a number or try to raise this issue on social media. So a lot of them now, they're actually aware that there are all these technology tracking tools that they need to be aware of, and they need to respond.
Anyway, thank you so much for your time. It's been really lovely talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing me in to speak about this.
NASS-AI is not the first project to think about using technology to uphold government transparency. In Kenya, Mzalendo seeks to make information more accessible from the proceedings of the country's parliament. In Jordan, Ishki aims to involve citizens in developing solutions to civic problems. And Vota Inteligente in Chile promotes government transparency by informing Chilean citizens about corruption and policy debates through the use of social media. The people behind these projects create them for you and I, for us to be able to have a more participatory role in how we are governed. So wherever you see such tools made available, please take advantage of them. If you know any other tools like these that have been developed or that are being developed, please share with us. IAC Podcast is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. On Twitter, we are at IAC_podcast. On Facebook and Instagram, we are at I Am Change Podcast. You can reach us via any of these channels. Our quote of the week is by Mandy Hill. Change is painful, but nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. Please rate and review IAC Podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. That way, more people can find us. Until the next episode, continue to be the change you want to see.